I'm not happy.
I don't need Elizabeth Warren or the government giving away my money.
Calling Mike Bloomberg an oligarch has implications in this country that I think are unfair and unreasonable.
I care. That's it.
Makes you think of some rich person who got their money off of oil in Russia, who's taking advantage of a broken and dysfunctional system.
Bernie Sanders saying, the country's corrupt, our system's corrupt. Be careful about that language, Bernie. You know, be careful.
Oh, well, I'm sorry.
They want to make you drink Starbucks every day from now until forever.
Wednesday. You know what time it is. It's around the nation. Waldorf Nation, everybody, welcome to the show. We've got a good one today for you. Man, we got some heavy stories today. So I'm going to dive into the whole Ukraine situation. I know everybody has, but I'm going to give you my take on this, especially considering how corporate media seems to be pushing us into a war, into a conflict. So yes, we've got that. We're going to talk about the freedom. We got freedom. We got, of course, students at high school, public school, being forced into a religious rally. Super disgusting. We've got, of course, union busting in when it comes to Starbucks, and then McDonald's might be begging employees not to quit in a very disastrous way. So those are the stories. That's what we're going to go over today. The Ukrainian story, of course, is very, very involved, long. I'm going to show you some examples, of course, of corporate media that are really beating the drums for another conflict here. And this time, of course, that conflict would be, I mean, when isn't it disastrous? But even more so in this case. So we're going to do that. We're going to dive in there. If you haven't already, please like and share the stream. Very, very helpful if you do so. And yeah, if you, if you support us, of course, you can send super chats. You can become a member. You can do all that wonderful stuff. But anyway, why don't we dive in? Begging not to quit. How much is it worth? Apparently not $15 an hour. Which isn't even enough in these days. But anyway, let's talk about Ukraine. It's insane in the Ukraine. I'm just gonna go now. All right, that's enough. Denounce and reject myself. Okay. Anyway, very, very serious story too. So, all right. It appears that corporate media is pushing a new war over Ukraine. So now there's an analysis of media headlines from some of the 3 of the biggest newspapers, news media organizations in the country. And that analysis found that they, of course, are pushing for conflict. A lot of pro-war, very hawkish opinions in the news. Now, that, of course, goes alongside with U.S. officials that are also adding fuel to the fire and saying that Ukraine is under imminent invasion from Russia. Russia's coming. They're going to come over the border. They're going to invade Ukraine, and they're going to seize and annex it just like they did Crimea. So now, look, before I get into the details of this story, I just want to remind you, because I'm sure you still already know by now, if you've been watching me for some time, that I'm not a fan of Russia. I've been very critical of Vladimir Putin. Russia, again, grabbed Crimea, it annexed it. I thought that that was wrong. I do not defend them on that issue. But that said, I'm also against war. And so what I'm seeing in the mainstream press right now is very, very concerning, and what looks like to be a manufacturing of consent for a hot war in Ukraine, which again would be disastrous for the United States, for Russia, and most importantly for the Ukrainian people. And so I'm not at all interested in that. So let's dive in to the details here. So as I said before, corporate media is sounding the alarm over a buildup of Russian troops close to the 1,200-mile border with Ukraine. In fact, according to reports, there's been almost 100,000 troops in that vicinity. But remember, they're inside their own border. They're in their own country. And so, yes, sure, whenever you hear reports of troop buildups near, other countries, like, oh no, right? Everybody gets a little bit spooked. I can understand that. It makes you think that something bad is going to happen. But I just want to urge everybody to look at the other side of the equation here. So I'm specifically referring to what helped escalate the situation to get here in the first place. And that would be the expansion of NATO into Eastern Europe. So now, if you don't know, NATO is a military alliance that was made to counter the Soviet Union. Now, the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore, but NATO does. And so NATO, even though the Soviet Union doesn't exist, has been adding member states to their military alliance, and they are hostile to Russia. So now, from their side, from the Russian side, I mean, if you're in Russia and you're seeing all these NATO states that were never friendly to you, that were always hostile to you, build up around your country, you're going to think, oh, well, that's kind of scary. I don't like that. I don't like that at all. And so you can kind of understand when you look at it from the other side, right? And so now, that said, Putin's an autocrat. Yes, he's the government of Russia is corrupt. It's run by oligarchs, oil barons, things like that. And so now Putin is a great example of an autocrat. Putin is using this situation to say, oh, look, hey, we're really being oppressed over here, right? And so you're provoking us. And by the way, he's kind of right about that. We have been provoking them because remember, NATO, even especially since it's a hostile alliance to the Russians anyway, we also promised them in a way not to expand. And so think about it this way, right? If Russia had an alliance with Mexico, or any other country, by the way, and they were, not necessarily hostile, but a hostile power had an alliance with Mexico, or Mexico was considering joining a hostile alliance. And so Russia started shipping weapons, or they were expanding in South America. Well, then the United States would be very nervous, wouldn't we? Actually, there's a real world example of that already happening, and that was Cuba in the 1960s. That almost came to nuclear war. And so that's the danger here. So now there seems to be a debate going on about what promises were made to Russian leaders about that future NATO expansion. Now, one side argues, well, we never really made an agreement. I mean, we never made a promise. Putin's just, he's just making things up so that he can justify invading Ukraine. Well, now, again, I'm going to tell you that nothing justifies an invasion. But on the other side, you have people saying, oh, actually, no, there was an agreement, not with Putin, but with the Soviet Union, with the Russians. And we get that from documentation that was declassified from the National Security Archive at George Washington University. Now, they released a large number of formerly classified documents that suggest it was an agreement not to expand NATO eastward as long as the Russians left East Germany alone. So now that was, again, near the breakup of the Soviet Union, right? And so now the Russians did not go into East Germany. Therefore, they kept their side of the bargain. However, NATO did not. Now, the document showed that multiple national leaders had been considering rejecting Central and Eastern European membership in NATO as of early 1990 and through 1991. Discussions in NATO in the context of German unification negotiations in 1990 were not at all narrowly limited to the status of East German territory, and that subsequent Soviet and Russian complaints about being misled about NATO expansion were founded in written contemporaneous memcons and telcons at the highest levels. It is a matter of record that in 1990, the U.S. Secretary of State James Baker had promised Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev that it would not expand NATO into the formerly communist states of Eastern Europe. However, what happened? NATO expanded into the former communist states of Eastern Europe. By 1999, NATO had expanded to include Hungary, Poland, the Czech Republic, Latvia, Lithuania, and then Estonia. And so, yes, there has been NATO expansion. Now, to be fair, these countries, yes, they were brought into NATO. Now, that made the Russians understandably nervous. However, at that time, they were not being armed. So there weren't actually weapons and troops being shipped to those countries. However, that was, and by the way, let me give you more information here, more context. Several years after German reunification in 1997, NATO also said that in current and foreseeable security environment, there would be no permanent stationing of substantial combat forces on the territory of new NATO members. So again, those aforementioned NATO states, or NATO members that were added post-Soviet Union through 1990 to 1999, yes, they were members of NATO, they were close to Russia, but they were not being given arms. Okay? And so now that's an important point. Okay? So, and it really kind of shows you how nuanced this conversation is. Okay? And so now, that said, that changed in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea. So now that was a provocation from the Russians. That was an escalation. And so, as a result, you had NATO now arming and sending weapons and troops to these countries, which then, again, further escalates the situation after the first escalation, or I should say the second escalation, which is Putin annexing Crimea. And so understand that this is nuanced. You don't have any good guys here. Nobody's nobody's a saint, and nobody's just purely the victim, okay? And so this is international diplomacy, this is international politics, and it gets very complicated. And so, look, that's why there's so much tension these days. And that's why we still need to diffuse that tension. So now, I agree that Russia should not have annexed Crimea. Now, let me go into the media angle of this, which I think it's really, really important. That's after the history. So now, you look at mainstream corporate media, and what they're doing now is that they're trying to further inflame tensions at a time when right now we should be focusing on diplomatic solutions. 90% of recent opinion articles in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal have taken a very hawkish view on the conflict. So now, only taking into account NATO and the United States' point of view and painting Russia as the sole aggressor in everything, which I've just explained the history, why they are not the sole aggressor. Now, opinion columns have also expressed support for sending U.S. weapons and troops to the region. Now, as I've mentioned before, the number of troops on the border of Ukraine, you have a buildup. And that's no denying that. However, we've also seen similar buildups throughout the years with nothing happening. In fact, in 2015, Reuters and the New York Times claimed that Russia was massing troops and heavy firepower, including tanks, artillery, and rocket launchers, on the border, and again called for war. A year later, The Guardian reported that Russia would soon have 333,000 soldiers on the border. In 2017, the Wall Street Journal claimed that tens of thousands of soldiers were being deployed to the border, the New York Times upped that figure to as many as 100,000. A few months later, U.S. News said that thousands of tanks were joining them. Now, all of that is to illustrate a history of pretty much establishment media fear-mongering over what's going on. Again, we're talking about their own soldiers in their own borders. So now, another example, in 2018, the New York Times and other media outlets were reporting of about 80,000 units on the border, and in the spring of last year, it was also reported by, again, Reuters and the New York Times, that Russia had amassed armies totaling well over 100,000 units on Ukraine's border, to them signaling that war is imminent. Now, they're reporting now that there's less than 100,000 units. Now, they don't talk about what's on the other side of the border, what's on the Ukrainian side. There's 250,000 Ukrainian units stationed on the other side of the border that are ready just in case Russia does come in to try to invade Ukraine. Now, that's also backed up by NATO weaponry, and again, NATO troops that would be more than willing to respond to any act of aggression by Russia. So, now, here's the thing. The Ukrainians, in a lot of these discussions about U.S. foreign policy, we leave out the people that are going to be the most impacted, and that's the Ukrainians themselves, right? So now, listen to what they're saying. Now, they say that the Russians, while they have always been a threat, and they've been very open about that, they also say that U.S. media, Western media, is actually overblowing the threat, and in addition, doing Putin's work for him. In fact, this is Alexei Danilov, the Chief Secretary of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council. Here's what he said, quote, "We don't see any grounds for statements about a full-scale offensive on our country." Danilov also added that the tension threatens to tank their economy. And so, and not only that, but again, the threat, which does exist and has been there for a while, for years actually, it's still not as bad as what corporate media is painting it out to be. Corporate media is pretending like this is a quick escalation and that, oh my God, they're ready to invade, even though we have seen this pattern happen for quite some time. And so now here's what he said on this to the BBC. Quote, "We emphasize this and now articulate to our partners that we cannot afford to let our economy fall. We also need help with this. After all, if people go into a state of panic, this is a very dangerous situation for the country." And again, it helps. It actually does help embolden Putin if that country is destabilized, by, again, rumors of impending invasion and war. So you create that panic, you do Putin's work for him, right? So now, again, he added that he believes the threat from Russia is no longer different than what it was in the previous year and the year before and the year before, ever since going back to 2008. So again, that's not to say that there isn't a threat, but the media has exaggerated that threat far more than what it actually is. So now, what do? Well, we escalate, we de-escalate, we de-escalate. We make sure that we don't escalate the situation by, sending more troops and sending more weapons. Now, another way that we could de-escalate the situation is, wait for it, why don't we just not ask Ukraine to join NATO? I mean, that would de-escalate the whole situation. Now, that doesn't mean that the United States wouldn't be able to help Ukraine in the case of an actual invasion if the Russians decided to do so. It just means that it would satisfy, again, that's what Putin's asking for, all right? That's what the Russians are asking for. Hey, we just don't want another NATO state on our borders. Okay. Hey, you know what? I know, the whole argument of like, but you're giving in to Putin. We give him something, and you reduce the tension in the area, and you avoid a war. We get something in return. That's no war. And by the way, most importantly, the Ukrainians also don't get a war. Because then they would be the most impacted, not just by conventional weapons, which would be disastrous, but also nuclear weapons, of which both the United States and Russia have gigantic arsenals of. So now, let's go more to back to the media angle of this, right? And so now, the tension, as I said before, is being exacerbated, escalated by pro-war pundits in major newspapers. So now, when you look at the opinion pieces, it's full of pro-war rhetoric. And you're going to be maybe amazed by this, maybe not. But overall, when they looked, when you use the search Ukraine in the fact of a global news database, the opinion pieces that you find published in the weeks between January 7th, January 28th, they found 91 articles in total, 15 in the Times, 49 in the Washington Post, and 27 in the Wall Street Journal. Okay? Overall, the tone from the three newspapers studied was very, very hawkish, with around 90% of the columns saying, get tough. In fact, here's Wesley Clark's Washington Post article. Russian President Vladimir Putin aims beyond Ukraine. Checking him right now is crucial. Well, now, how would you check him? Hopefully not with an invasion into Russia. Columnist Max Boot claimed that Putin definitely wants to resurrect the Soviet Empire. Boot's colleague at the Post, Henry Olsen, attacked Biden for not being pro-war enough. This is the guy who voted for the Iraq War, and you saw where that went, and described the president as, quote-unquote, a weakling who was unfit to lead. The Wall Street Journal attacked leftists for not wanting to go to war with Russia and China, and saying that American imperialism doesn't exist. There was also complete unanimity in presenting Russia, and not just NATO, as the sole aggressor. With 87 of the 91 articles presenting the issue as such, 4 articles did not identify anyone as the aggressor, and there was overwhelming support for sending in both huge quantities of what the Biden administration has called lethal aid. Lethal aid. Weapons. That's weapons. And also deploying American troops in the region, a move that would rapidly escalate the threat of nuclear war. As Brett Stevens wrote in the Times, the best short-term response to Putin's threats is the one that Biden administration is at last beginning to consider: the permanent deployment in large numbers of U.S. forces to frontline NATO states. From Estonia to Romania, armed shipments to Kiev, which so far are being measured in pounds, not tons, need to become a full-scale airlift, because of course that's what you need to do. You need to poke the bear further. You need to go and escalate by putting even more troops there around their country. Now, the Post went further, with one column demanding that the U.S. send around 85,000 troops to the region immediately, and a figure that they say must be matched by other NATO members. The Journal went further. Here's Walter Russell Mead, and this is what it comes down to. Military budgets, he says, will have to grow as the U.S. increases its capacity against both Russia and China. The fantasies of withdrawing from some regions to focus on others will have to be set aside. Europe, the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Latin America all require more American and allied focus and attention, even as we continue to gear up in the Indo-Pacific. The U.S. will have to spend less time inspecting the moral shortcomings of potential allies and more time thinking about how it can deepen its relationships with them. Basically, what that means, this guy, Walter Russell Mead, is basically saying, let's just occupy everything. Let's just send American troops everywhere. Endless war. Yes, the defense contractors are salivating. They are drooling over this. But it gets worse. That's just mainstream media. You know what? This is on Fox News. Republican Senator Roger Wicker, here's what he said. He said that he did not want to rule out a preemptive nuclear strike against Russia. So that's what the Republicans are saying. Here you have the Democrats, a Democratic administration, and the liberal, so-called liberal press that's saying troops everywhere. Let's lethal aid, more troops, tens of thousands of American soldiers. Let's increase the defense budget by even more. It's already $768 billion a year, the more than any other country in the world. All the other modern countries in the world combined. No, we got to give more money to the military, more money to defense contractors, more weapons, more everything sent. And then Republicans, of course, because they have to be crazy and say, why don't we just nuke them? No, it's not off the table. Not off the table. No, this is insane. That's insane. No, we shouldn't do any of that. I mean, that's crazy. No, there needs to be a peaceful solution. We need to be working on peace, not any of this crap. I don't want a hot war. Now, again, the very simple thing is to say, okay, Ukraine, why don't we reconsider your membership, or just we'll postpone it. To be determined at a later date. Okay, that's all you need to do. I think that alone is worth the escalation. And that's not to say that we shouldn't defend Ukraine if the Russians decide to jump in there. Well, then that would be on the Russians for escalating the situation, which would, of course, demand a response. But for God's sakes, don't poke your way into it. Don't try to escalate the situation. Nobody wants that. Well, I mean, defense contractors do, but nobody else wants it. I don't want it. The American people don't want it. And the Ukrainian people don't want it. Let's not do that. But again, corporate media, by the way, corporate media is trying to manufacture consent for one reason. It's because they work for the defense contractors. Their military connections, they love their military connections. And those connections want to make a lot of money. And they're going to, if this happens. Now, whether they fail to realize it, or maybe they do, that Russia's nuclear power and has enough missiles to destroy the entire world several times over, and we also have an even bigger complement of missiles that could destroy the world even more times than the Russians can. Well, now what's the point of that? Mutually assured destruction is not good. And I'm always going to be against that. So again, we need diplomatic solutions. Instead of the fear-mongering, I think maybe the media needs to back off a bit and actually report the facts instead of just fear-mongering on Russia. We've got to find a mutually beneficial agreement between Ukraine and the Russians that ensures both peace and security for all the parties involved. Okay. All right, let's move on. Why does the world not protect democracy? You realize that right now we're not protecting democracy. I don't think the United States has ever really actually protected democracy. Do you know that how many democratically elected leftist leaders the United States, the CIA, has overthrown in the global south? Not even the global south, the Middle East, Iran. The United States has funded the Saudis. The Saudis are not democratic. They don't believe in democracy. No, of course we don't support democracy across the world. No. What we do is defend, unfortunately, corporate interests across the world, access to resources. All of that stuff, oh, we're out there defending democracy. Total and complete lie. It's just not true. It's propaganda. That's unfortunate. And by the way, Hungary, Viktor Orban is a literal fascist. He's a part of NATO, his country. No. This is it's the no war. No war. It's not go in that direction. All right. All right. Let me see if I have any. Ah, yes. Here we go. There's been a lot of news lately about the Canadian truckers. It's a freedom convoy, and how they're working to protect your freedom. Now, they're fighting for your freedom, and you know they're all members of the working class, and they're there to end the vaccine, the brutal tyranny of the vaccine mandates. Now, of course, that's all BS, and not them going against vaccine mandates, of course. They're definitely anti-vax and anti-vax mandate, but there's some other misconceptions about them that we are finding out. So now, for one of the claims is that, oh, this is a huge amount of truckers, 50,000 truckers are on the road right now, and they're there to fight for your freedom. Well, actually, no. It's actually a really small amount of truckers, a small minority, as well as a smattering of far-right activists and other groups. In fact, the Canadian Trucking Alliance, the primary advocacy group for Canadian truckers, actually is against the protests and notes that 85% of Canadian truckers who regularly cross the border are fully vaccinated. So this is, again, very small group of people, of truckers. They do not represent the majority. So now, 50,000 truckers, again, nowhere near that. Canadian journalists actually put the number of trucks in the hundreds in late January. In fact, Ottawa Police Chief Peter Sloney told reporters on January 31st that it was actually impossible to provide exact crowd size figures, but he had heard the numbers as high as 18,000 of total demonstrators. Now that's important because demonstrator does not mean trucker. So now they could be truckers. There could be a pretty large amount, 18,000. That's quite a few people, right? But it's not 50,000. Now, in order to inflate the numbers, social media is taken to putting out false images. That's actually not related to the protests, but claimed that they were. Let me give you some examples. There's a video that had been shared on various social media platforms that was captioned a claim that showed South Carolina truckers heading to Ottawa to join the convoy. Turns out, fact-checking, according to USA Today, it actually showed an August 2021 truck parade in support of the Special Olympics. All right, well, there you go. A video of honking Brazilian truckers that circulated on Facebook was from May 2021, and it's actually a demonstration in support of Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, not a demonstration of solidarity with Canadian truckers. So now, to be fair, I'm pretty sure the people who supported Jair Bolsonaro would probably support the Ottawa truckers. Bolsonaro, of course, being anti-vaxxer. All right, fair enough. They can have that one. But another photo of a massive protest crowd shared in Twitter posts in both English and Spanish, as if it were from Ottawa this year, actually depicted a 1991 demonstration in Moscow against the communist government of the Soviet Union. Oops. Ah, well, that's sad. Another photo, which has been described in Facebook posts as a group of Amish people driving to support the convoy, is a shot of an old order of Mennonites going to church, according to PolitiFact. There are also claims that 50% of the Ottawa police force quitting in protest due to the mandates and showing solidarity with the truckers. That's also not true. In fact, Ottawa police spokesperson Constable Amy Gagnon said on Monday that these claims were entirely false. There have been no resignations in relation to the demonstration, and then all of their available officers are present and working. The Canadian Armed Forces also has refuted any reports of vowing allegiance in relation to the protests. They said, this is a military spokesperson saying, quote, "In short, no, we have not made any such comment." Okay. And then finally, you have been seeing probably false reports that the government had instructed hotels to not rent rooms to the protesters. This is Ottawa hotels. So now CNN called the hotels and found out that no, that's not true. The employees who took CNN's calls at the downtown Marriott and 5 other Ottawa hotels on Monday said their establishments had not been given any anti-protester instruction by any government. Patrick Champagne, press secretary to Ottawa Mayor Jim Watson, told CNN that the claim is, quote-unquote, categorically false. Alexander Cohen, a spokesperson for Canadian Public Safety Minister Marco Medicino, called the claim ludicrous and said that no one from the federal government has done that. Steve Bell, president of the Ottawa Gatineau Hotel Association, said that, quote, "To my knowledge, there is no truth to this rumor. As for the Marriott in particular, there were rooms still available." Now, as to the claims that it's a working class movement, that it's, all people from all sides, right? Well, no, that's not exactly true either. According to Jacob Bowder, Bowder was part of a convoy, and by the way, that's one of the founders of the movement, right? Now, he is actually part of a convoy a couple of years ago called United We Roll. So now, United We Roll actually was connected to the far right and white nationalist hate groups. United We Roll tooled the country in opposition to Canada's federal carbon tax and the UN Migration Pact. United We Roll also planned an anti-union protest where convoy members threatened to dismantle the picket line and run over striking workers. Yes, real working class. Yes. Now, they also criticized rail workers for demanding better pay, benefits, and working conditions. But very, very working class. So they're on the side of the workers, everybody. They're on the side of protecting the workers, unless they're trying to strike for fair wages. No, come on. There's also been no discussion within Convoy's ranks, as far as I know, of investment in any public health care, employer accountability, sick days, rent control, financial support for any workers that have lost their jobs. All they say is no vaccines. And not only that, but you've also had Confederate and Nazi flags that were seen at some of these protests. So, yeah, there's one. There's a fuck Trudeau sign, which, by the way, fuck Trudeau. I don't even like him either, but I would, rather have him than a Nazi. I know, terrible choices, right? And then, of course, you have Confederate flags. What are Confederate flags doing in Canada? That's super weird. That's super weird. And now, of course, I know conspiracy theorists are going to claim that, oh no, it's one of those things where it was staged. It was staged. You can't prove it's not staged. You can't prove it's not staged. All right. Well, there you go. Look, I just think that if they were really wanting to look out for the working class, then they'd actually address the issues facing truckers. This is a culture war protest. That's what this is. The vaccine stuff has become a culture war issue. If you were enmeshed in this, you're not fighting for freedom. You're fighting the conservative culture war. Shouldn't the government's job be to ensure the safety of workers? I know, they generally don't. In this case, it's bad for business to allow COVID to continue spreading around the workplace and have people have to take time off to, go get tested and to go, into quarantine. And look, by the way, the government has also bungled COVID quite a bit when it comes to opening up things too soon. And so it is this unfortunate mindset where everybody's like, get back to business. Now, guess what? That's also the aim of the truckers, get back to business, and the vaccine mandates and all the stuff related to COVID. We're sick of it. We're gonna end that. And you know what that message also, who mirrors that? putting out the same message? Right-wing media. And now corporate media. Corporate media is also putting out the same message. We're tired of the pandemic. We're so over it. No, we're not over it. It's not done with us. It's not done with us. And so we're still having people that are dying, thousands of people every day. And we're still having, again, massive COVID infections. And yes, we still have a lot of unvaccinated Americans. And so, and by the way, still unvaccinated Canadians as well. Just less so in Canada than we have them here. But unfortunately, that's what we have. It has become a culture war issue, and this is nothing more than the right continuing their culture wars over vaccines at the detriment, not to the benefit of workers. Understand who they really represent. All right. Moving on. Not to mention a lot of the Canadian truckers are Asian. I didn't see any of them there. Well, that's because Asian truckers in Canada have been blockaded by these right-wing truckers. I don't think you know, you probably haven't seen that news story. But yeah, a lot of them have been blockaded in. So they can't go and get food and medicine and you know, things like that. They're fiercely anti-immigrant. Anybody who says this is a working class, regular person, not right-wing protest is blind to this, is blind to what's going on, whether willfully or not. You're not seeing the situation for what it is. Not a working class protest, more right-wing culture war nonsense that is hurting workers, that is hurting immigrants, people of color, and it's just more angry white people. All right, moving on. A group of West Virginia high school students are upset and have engaged in a walkout after being forced to attend a Christian revival assembly. Now, this isn't public high school. This is in Huntington, West Virginia, where students were instructed to their teachers. We have a couple of the students that they talked to here in the article that were forced to go to the auditorium to listen to a sermon from an evangelical preacher, Nick Walker of Nick Walker Ministries. So now, the mini revival actually took place last week during a daily non-instructional break in the schedule during which students are able to study for tests, work on college prep, or listen to guest speakers. Now, normally, okay, if you have guest speakers or whatever, that's supposed to be your time to do that. But that's not what happened here. These students, again, were instructed and told to go to the auditorium to listen to this guy. Now, according to Jed Flowers, who's a Cabell County School spokesperson, it's supposed to be voluntary. But I guess some people just didn't get the message. Now, according to two students, 16-year-old Cameron Mays and senior Max Nybert, when they arrived, they were asked to give their lives over to Jesus, and if they didn't, they were told that they were going to go to hell. Great. Awesome. Nothing like religious indoctrination in the schools, which, by the way, is illegal. You can't do that. Now, if you're mad at me for saying that it's illegal, well, then you're just factually incorrect. Again, imagine instead, think about this. Imagine if instead of Nick Walker, you had Mohammed al-Salam bin Laden telling people that they should give their lives over to Allah. You'd be mad then, wouldn't you? Now, I'd be mad in both situations because religion does not belong in school. Now, that said, we have a separation of church and state that is in the First Amendment. It says Congress shall not establish a religion. Now, and by the way, think about it this way. We don't have evolution teachers, biology teachers, interrupting your sermon to go and preach about Darwin. But this is what they're doing. They're coming into the schools to preach about religion. It's massively, massively unconstitutional. So now Nybert and other Huntington students, about 100 of them, actually staged a walkout. In fact, they had signs. They chanted, "Separate church and state, my faith, my choice." And I think that's great. Way to go, kids. I agree. We shouldn't have any religion in the public classroom. It doesn't belong there. And by the way, the Constitution also agrees. So now, as I said before, the school claims that it was voluntary and organized by the school chapter of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. Flowers said that there was supposed to be a sign-up sheet, but the two teachers had mistakenly brought their entire class. Was it really a mistake? I mean, I can't really prove one way or the other. But, I mean, again, West Virginia. Now, what's even more egregious about this story is what happened to a student who wasn't a Christian. Bethany Fellington said her Jewish son was one of the students that was forced to attend the assembly at Huntington High. She said that when he asked to leave, the teacher said no. The door's locked. You can't leave. Now, does that sound voluntary to you? Sure doesn't seem voluntary to me. But that said, Walker says, oh, no, the schools didn't invite me. It's the students. It's the students. We don't even have to knock on the door. The students, they receive hope here. And then they want to bring hope to their school or their classmates, because we see a lot of hopelessness here in the Huntington area. Students struggling with addiction, anxiety, and depression. And when you see regions like this, he says, then you really know they need the Lord. Really, it actually sounds like they need better working conditions, like the parents, the families, better working conditions, pay, and healthcare. You know, I mean, that would be nice. That would actually make families better. If you want to cure hopelessness in West Virginia, which is one of the poorest states in the nation, well then, I'm sorry, but you're not going to do it with just Jesus. And I don't care. You can be a religious person. To me, I don't give a shit. Believe what you want. That's freedom. But I also believe that taxpayer-funded public schools should not be hosting religious pastors. I don't care to have people recruited into a cult, your cult or any other cult. And I'm glad these students are fighting back. In fact, Nybert, during the walkout, passed around a petition for students to sign that he says he plans to deliver to the Cabell County Board of Education. Now, that petition asks that the board apologize to families for what happened and discipline the teachers who mandated that students go to the assembly. And I think that's fair. I'm not calling for anyone to be fired, just like, hey, you shouldn't do that. You're not allowed to do that. Now, it also calls for review or creation of a board policy pertaining to religion or religiously motivated speakers in schools. So now, look, if you want religion in school, well, here's a simple thing. You have to have all of them. You can't just have yours. Get all of them. Get all of them. If you don't have them all, then you shouldn't have just one, because that's being preferential. Now, again, I'm incredibly proud of these kids. Incredibly proud. And I'm really hoping that he is successful, that they're successful in protecting the First Amendment, which, as I mentioned, I have to remind you, guarantees both a freedom of and from religion. It's one of our most sacred, rights that is enshrined in the Constitution. And I will, of course, always defend it. And I'm glad to see these young people are too. All right. Starbucks is being called out for attempting to crush a unionization drive by firing several workers. So now this happened in Memphis. In fact, Nikki Taylor, a former shift supervisor at the Poplar and Highland store in Memphis, posted this on Twitter, saying that I was fired by Starbucks today for policies that I've never even heard of before and that have never been written up before. Now, Taylor was one of the ones that were leading a unionization drive that was actually created on January 17th. So that's Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and it's actually in support of, and reflects Martin Luther King Jr. striking with the sanitation workers to, once again, create a union before he was assassinated. Now, Taylor added that they're not just firing her, they're firing the entire committee. This is a clear attempt by Starbucks to retaliate against those of us who were leading the union effort at our store and to scare other partners. Starbucks will not get away with this. The entire country will be outraged. Now, as I mentioned, she's not the only one that was fired. Beto Sanchez, another shift supervisor at the store, said that Starbucks has been fighting desperately to silence us because we did not back down or let them shake us. Now, a Starbucks representative, however, told the New York Times, quote, that the workers were fired for violations including allowing at least one reporter inside the store to conduct an after-hours interview in which some of the employees were not masked. Oh, see, you didn't have a mask on, you're fired. Wow, really? Now, I think it's pretty obvious the ones that they picked out were the ones that were leading the union drive. So now, according to a former manager who had worked at that very store, and her name is Amy Holden. So she pointed out that terminating employees for these kinds of policy violations is incredibly rare. Take a look.
We do not move straight to termination for anything that is not considered egregious, like stealing and harassment and those kinds of things. Those things we would move towards corrective action to, as long as partner resources supported it. The majority of a violation, a policy violation, would move to some level of corrective action where we would assume positive intent and help that partner correct their action rather than moving straight to termination. It's very rare that we move straight to termination for some sort of policy violation. These partners were terminated for policies like going behind the line when they were off the clock. It's something that's done across the company and especially in the Memphis area. They went behind the line for various reasons, but if we terminated everybody that did that, we would not have a staff. Many of those partners have done those things directly in front of the district manager and the new store manager, and they've never been coached on it before. Nothing was ever said about it. So they were terminated for going behind the line, which is a violation of policy. They should not be doing that, but it's not something that we would terminate a partner for, especially for the first time of them doing it. We would want to have a conversation with them and make sure they were aware of the policy.
All right, so again, she explained it there. They don't normally fire people for this, but it just so happens to people that were trying to organize a workers' union at that specific Starbucks. Very, very strange. But we've seen this before. Look, anybody who's worked basically anywhere knows that people violate certain company policies all the time. It's usually little dumb things, right? Yes, they're technically on the books, but nobody follows it. Nobody follows it. I mean, look, let me give you an example. The shop that I worked at, that was plastic injection molding. We're supposed to wear the side shields with our safety glasses. Nobody did that. Nobody. Only, there was an exception, of course, only when OSHA showed up. Then they're like, oh, you better get your safety glasses on. You better get your safety on. Nobody follows these things. Nobody. And normally, nobody cares. But if you try to start a union, well, then suddenly, oh, you see, it's on the books. We're going to have to let you go. Union busting 101. Very, dirty, dirty tactic that bosses will absolutely use it against you. But it helps to get them to get rid of organizers. So now, of course, Starbucks Workers United, that represents the company, that are trying to unionize at various locations, they said in this situation was the most blatant act of union busting yet, and claimed retaliation against union organizing committees at that Poplar and Highland store. And that's, again, after they allowed the media to conduct an interview in the store after hours. Now, the group added that Starbucks is using those policies that have never been enforced before, such as going behind a counter when a partner is not officially working. To fire workers, Starbucks chose to selectively enforce those policies. They have not previously been consistently enforced as a subterfuge to fire union leaders. Many of these workers did not have any prior offenses or write-ups. And by the way, there's a longer video to that where Amy breaks it down, all the different things. It's a 5-minute video. I'll have the link in the description. You should watch all of it as she details why each and every person that was fired and why the policies that they were being fired for, the violations, were just garbage, bullshit. And so it's a really good breakdown. But that said, Starbucks workers, the Starbucks Workers United say that as a result of this, they're going to file charges against the company at the National Labor Relations Board. Now, if they take this to the NLRB and they actually win, well, this wouldn't be the first time. Last year, an NLRB administrative judge found Starbucks had illegally retaliated against 2 baristas at a Philadelphia Starbucks who tried to unionize. According to the judge, Andrew Gollin, they found that Starbucks closely monitored their public social media activity, attempted to gauge employees' support for the employees' efforts, and unlawfully spied on protected conversations one of the employees initiated with their coworkers. The agency added that Gollin concluded Starbucks retaliated against the employees and discharged them in an attempt to quell the organizing drive. Now, in this case, the Poplar and Highland workers, again, chose Martin Luther King Jr. Day to launch that drive and are demanding higher pay, including a minimum wage of at least $15 an hour, better working conditions, and improved COVID-19 safety precautions. So now, none of that is controversial at all. None of that is anything that Starbucks can't provide and should have already been providing. I mean, again, Starbucks is massively profitable. Now, in case you're screaming, but Jeff, you don't understand. They're going to raise their prices. They're going to raise their prices. But they already have raised their prices. In fact, according to executives, the company had actually already raised prices twice this year. October, and then, once this year and once last year. October and in January. And by the way, they have additional price increases planned throughout the rest of 2022. That's despite generating about $8.1 billion in revenue in the most recent quarter. And actually also had their recent profit margins increased by 31%. And was able to, at the same time, give their CEO a 39% raise to just over $20 million. Record profits, record revenue, record CEO pay, and yet they're crushing unions. No, we can't pay our workers. We can't allow them to have a union. And we have to raise their prices again. Bullshit. This is just another example of corporate greed and union busting. All right, one more here, real quick, before I run out of time. You love this story. An image is going viral of a McDonald's handout begging people not to quit. So now this is getting a lot of attention because of the language here used and the condescension. So let me show you that first here. There it is. Don't quit. We know many of you may be expecting a large refund from your income taxes and may consider quitting your job. Think before you act. Your tax refunds don't last forever, and you will need a job when the money runs out. You are important to us. If you need a short leave of absence, please let us know. We can work with you. Please get with your store manager to discuss your options. Now, look, I don't know if this is real or not. I don't know where this comes from, other than being posted on a Reddit board. But if it is real, holy crap. Again, wow. First of all, the assumptions. You know, you're getting, just because you get a large refund, you got to know that you're going to have to get a job because that money runs out. Wait, if you're working at McDonald's, chances are you're not going to get a large refund because you don't pay that much in to begin with. If you're making $10 an hour, you're not paying in as much as somebody making $25 an hour. You're not going to get a gigantic refund. Even with the credits and deductions, they're still not going to pay out very well. Now, the second assumption, of course, is that they're only quitting because he got that tax refund. And so they're quitting so they can be lazy and live off that money. Wait. And of course, it also adds into that's just because people don't want to work. Nobody wants to work anymore. And the final assumption, of course, is that you're stupid. You should think before you act, because obviously you're poor and you work at McDonald's, so you're not smart enough to make good decisions, obviously. I mean, whoever posted this, if this is real, if this is legit, maybe they should have put a little bit more thought into basically, I mean, if they handed this out to everybody, into not insulting their workers. Because that's exactly what they're doing. Insulting the workers. And again, the reason that I'm giving this the benefit of the doubt and into its authenticity is that we have all seen signs basically going after workers, attacking workers. Again, nobody wants to work anymore. Please be good to the staff that's still here, because nobody wants to work. Nobody wants to work. No, people don't want to work for poverty wages. They want to work. Now, that said, I understand that McDonald's has franchises, right? And so every franchise owner is different. Some McDonald's have actually raised their wages to $15 an hour. Okay, that's good. But some have not. Many have not. In fact, there was a story that went viral last year of a branch in Medford, Oregon, putting up a sign calling for child labor. We will now hire 14 and 15-year-olds. Instead of paying people more, we're just going to hire children because we believe that we can pay them less. It's amazing, isn't it? Now, this is all, again, because of the Great Resignation. People, again, are tired of being paid very poorly, treated like garbage, especially after a lot of people gave up a lot of things during the pandemic, okay? These were essential workers. They were told that they were essential throughout the entire pandemic. But again, we're not paid well. We're not given increases in pay. Yes, there was like temporary hazard pay for a little bit, but they still ended up having to not only enforce mask mandates for their stores and deal with unruly customers, people who are the rudest people, the people who don't, who attack other people for asking that they wear a mask and were mistreated, again, by management and other customers. They went through all of that and got nothing. Nothing, no respect at all. And so a lot of these people have left their jobs and moved on to something different. The Great Resignation, okay? And so, look, after being mistreated for so long, wouldn't you leave? I would. And so that's why people are doing this. It's not because, I'm lazy and I don't want to work and I got tax money. I got, $500 back in taxes that I paid in. That's my money. I'm just going to live off that for what? 2 weeks? Come on. No, it's too much. All right. Look, even if this isn't real, the fact that these companies are claiming to be so desperate for workers, yet not desperate enough to pay them, I mean, that certainly is real and is still the major problem. Pay workers, pay them better, and you'll actually see them stay. I know, it's a very strange concept. All right, anyway. That's all I got for you guys today. Thank you for, I doubt if that was real. Again, it's an open question, but there are other things that are related to this that are absolutely 100% real. The whole point of how they do really treat workers very, very poorly, and I think they do treat them like they're idiots. That's real. That's absolutely real. No. Amanda's Miracle Dragon Milk. That is a super yacht. Thank you. Not a mega yacht. It's a super yacht. And it also needs, a support yacht to park your helicopter. That's what you need. All right. Anyway. Thank you for going around the nation with me today. Really, really appreciate it. Like and share the stream. And have a great night. We're gonna see who to raid here on Twitch. Thank you for all the new follows, by the way. It's always nice to see them. We will do a Pac-Man raid. I don't know what he's talking about. Should be fun. All right. Thank you all. Love you. And remember, change begins with you. Good night, nation.
They want to make you drink Starbucks every day from now until forever.
Obama!
Disappointed!
Big, massive dump.
Please clap.
You're kicking me out the door. You're kicking me out the door.